My name is Marin Mathis. I was 32 years old when my parents put a price on me. $500,000. That was what they said I was worth to a family I had never met. A family living at the end of a gravel driveway in rural Nebraska. A family with a son in a wheelchair and a brother who smiled too quickly and watched too closely. My mother called it a fresh start. My father said almost nothing. I called the man I loved and ended 4 years of my life in less than 3 minutes. I thought that would be the day that broke me. It was not. The day that broke everyone else came a year later. A living room, a stack of papers, a glass jar filled with gray dirt, my parents at one side of the room, my husband's brother at the other. Their attorney beside him, everyone waiting for one signature. Then I opened a folder, and every face at that table changed. Because the man they called helpless had been sitting on something worth more than all of them put together. And the woman they thought they had bought was the only one in that room who knew how to prove it. None of them saw it coming. To understand how I got there, you need to know what kind of family I came from. I grew up in a town so small that everybody knew what your porch looked like, and nobody cared what happened behind the front door. My parents, Lorraine and Wade Mathis, lived in a cycle of debt and drinking and blame that repeated so often, it stopped sounding like conflict and started sounding like weather. You did not ask if the storm was coming, you asked how bad it would be when it got there. My mother liked control, my father liked escape. She pushed, he disappeared. I learned early that if something went wrong in that house, then somehow it would become my fault before the night was over. I got out at 18, not because they let me go. Because I ran hard enough that they could not keep up. Scholarships, a geology degree, then a master's in geochemistry, 3 part-time jobs, sleepless nights, coffee that tasted like pennies. I built a life from things that made sense. Rock layers, field notes, data points, a world where facts did not care who your mother was or how loudly she talked. By 31, I was working for the State Geological Survey. Quiet work, good work, the kind of work that does not make anybody clap for you, but the data is either right or it is wrong. I liked that. Then I met Daniel Pewitt. He found me at a conference in Omaha. He was a software engineer with warm eyes and an easy laugh and a kind of gentleness that made me suspicious at first because I had not grown up around gentle people. He liked how precise I was. I liked how calm he was. We dated for 4 years. The relationship was steady in the best possible way. No games, no guessing, no waiting for the emotional floor to disappear. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in his apartment while pasta water boiled over on the stove. He barely got halfway through the sentence before I said yes. That should have been the beginning of my life. The phone rang the next morning. I saw my mother's name on the screen and felt something cold move through me. 13 years without hearing her voice, and somehow my body still recognized danger before my mind did. She sounded exactly the same. Same slow opening. Same false softness. Same way of speaking, like she had simply paused the last argument and expected me to pick it back up. She said they were in trouble. I asked how much. She said it was not about money. It was always about money. Then she told me family needed me. She said there was a way out for all of us. She said I owed them one conversation after everything they had done to raise me. I said no. She kept talking. I said no again. Then she went quiet for a second and used the one phrase she had used my entire childhood whenever she wanted to drag guilt across my back like a rake. After everything we sacrificed for you, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ring on my hand. I already knew they were coming. 3 days later, they showed up at my apartment in Lincoln without warning. My mother in a pressed blouse and painted nails. My father thinner than I remembered, more bent, more gray. Still carrying himself like a man who had spent his whole life apologizing silently for things he was too weak to stop. My mother walked in and looked around my apartment like she was evaluating resale value. Then she set a leather folder on my kitchen table and told me to sit down because she had something wonderful. Wonderful? Inside the folder were photographs of a farmhouse, a property map, A typed letter from an attorney. My mother put her finger on the property line and told me about the Holloway family. Land outside Cedar Bluff. 200 acres. Old farm. Old money gone thin. One son named Robert Holloway, 35 years old, paralyzed from the waist down after a rockfall at a mining site. And a family willing to pay $500,000 to any woman willing to marry him. My first thought was that this had to be a joke. My second thought was worse. My mother was serious. She said Robert needed stability. She said I was steady. She said I was educated and practical and not getting any younger. Then she said the thing I will never forget for as long as I live. He cannot do better than you, that is the point. My father stared at the floor. I asked them to leave. My mother did not move. Then the numbers came out. $160,000 in debt. House going into foreclosure. Medical bills. Collections. A liver that my father had been soaking in cheap liquor for too many years. She flattened her hand over the folder and said this money fixes everything. I told her it did not fix me. She blinked once, then smiled. Honey, you have been fixing yourself your whole life. Let us catch up. That week I barely slept. I kept pacing my apartment and touching the ring on my finger until the skin underneath turned raw. Every path in front of me looked like some version of betrayal. If I said no then, my parents lost the house and maybe more. If I said yes then, I lost the future I had actually chosen. I wish I could tell you I was brave. I was tired. Tired in the way only eldest daughters from broken homes understand. Tired enough to confuse sacrifice with responsibility. Tired enough to believe that maybe if I gave them this one impossible thing, the debt would finally end. It never ends. But I did not know that yet. I drove to Daniel's apartment on a Tuesday. Same day of the week he had proposed. He opened the door smiling with a coffee mug in one hand and his laptop under the other arm. He was about to ask what we should order for dinner when he saw my face. I sat down, took off the ring, set it on the table. He did not touch it right away. He asked me what happened. I told him I could not marry him. He asked if there was someone else. I said no. He asked what had changed. And there it was, the impossible truth sitting in my throat. I could not tell him there was another man because there was not. I could not tell him I had fallen out of love because I had not. I could not tell him my mother had arranged a transaction because even saying it out loud made me feel unreal. So I gave him the cruelest version of the truth. I told him everything had changed and nothing could fix it. Daniel never raised his voice. That made it worse. He just sat there with his hands on his knees and looked at me like he was trying to solve an equation with missing numbers. When I left, he was still sitting beside the ring. I drove home with the windows down and the heater off even though the Nebraska cold cut through me like wire. I wanted the pain. I wanted something physical to be louder than the shame. 6 weeks later, I was in a motel room watching my mother iron my wedding dress on the bed. It cost $89 online. No alterations. The dress hung too straight and too stiff and looked like it had been made for a woman who had no pulse. My mother smoothed the fabric with deliberate care and told me I was doing the right thing. I said she kept repeating that because she needed to hear it. She did not deny it. Instead, she turned toward me and said the sentence that finally made the whole thing plain. You were always going to pay us back. There was no point arguing with that. Some sentences are not opinions. They are confessions. My father sat in the car outside the motel the whole time. I could see him through the window staring at the dashboard. He never came in. He never interrupted. He never stopped anything. Later, I learned my mother had already spent part of the money before the ceremony even happened. Tens of thousands gone, hidden debts, secret credit cards. A storage unit full of things she had bought and could not pay for. The money had started bleeding before I even stepped into the dress. I did not know that then. I only knew I was about to marry a stranger because my mother had decided my life was a financial instrument. The Holloway property looked abandoned from a distance. Flat gray land. A grain silo leaning slightly to one side. A farmhouse that had once been white and was now the color of old teeth. At the end of the gravel drive sat Robert Holloway in a wheelchair on a rough plywood ramp that looked newly built. He wore a dark jacket and held a small brass compass in one hand. That detail stayed with me, not the chair, not the house. The compass. The ceremony took 11 minutes. County clerk, no music, no flowers worth remembering, my mother smiling too hard. My father shaking Robert's hand without meeting his eyes. Someone snapped one photograph that I never asked to see. Afterward, the families drifted toward the house. Robert stayed on the porch. I stood beside him because I had no idea where else to go. He looked out over the field and said I did not have to stand there if I did not want to. I told him I did not know where I was supposed to stand. That was when he looked at me fully for the first time and said, "Nobody asked you either, did they?" 5 words. And with 5 words, the ground shifted. Until that moment, I had assumed he was another passive center of someone else's arrangement, a silent recipient of whatever his family decided. But those words told me something at once. Robert knew exactly what this marriage was. He knew it had not been freely chosen. He knew because he had been trapped in the same machinery. I asked about the compass. He said it had belonged to his grandfather, who had mapped the county decades ago. He said the old man always believed the dirt under that land mattered more than the crops above it. I did not know what that meant. I would. Not yet. That first evening I met Garrett Holloway. Robert's older brother, 6'3", broad shoulders, expensive boots, the kind of man who fills a room by force and calls it leadership. He shook my hand too long and welcomed me to the family with the polished confidence of a man who had practiced being believed. Inside a week, I understood the structure of that house. Garrett controlled everything. He managed the trust. He handled the taxes. He made the calls. He talked about Robert in the third person even when Robert was in the room. He decides when the repairs happen. He knows when Robert gets tired. He knows what is best for the property. Robert does not get a vote. That last line came at the kitchen table over a stack of tax documents Robert had asked to review. Garrett said it flat and casual like the weather. Robert said nothing, but I saw his jaw tighten. I also saw Garrett watching me to make sure I saw it too. That was the first time I understood this marriage had not only been arranged to solve my parents' debt. It had also been useful to Garrett. A wife made Robert look settled, cared for, contained. A married, disabled brother in a farmhouse is less likely to draw questions than a disabled brother fighting his family for control. The first months passed in careful silence. Robert and I lived in parallel, separate rooms, polite mornings, quiet dinners. I commuted to the survey office. He spent long hours in the study that had once belonged to his father, a room lined with old maps and textbooks and field notes. Some nights I could hear Garrett talking on the porch in a low, urgent voice. Some mornings I found paperwork on the kitchen table with signature lines marked in yellow. Robert never signed. Summer came and the house started revealing its truth in small ways. One afternoon, I found Robert in the barn with tools spread across his lap, repairing the well pump motor. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to because what I was seeing did not match the story I had been told. He did not look helpless. He looked exact. He told me the impeller was shot and Garrett was about to waste $400 on a repairman for a problem he could solve himself. I asked how he knew how to do it. He told me he had a degree in hydrogeology and 6 years of field work before the accident. That was not in the version of Robert anyone had sold me. Later, Connie, the home health aide, filled in more of the outline. Robert had worked for a mining consultancy. He specialized in groundwater mapping and subsurface geology. His father had done related work too. The smartest person in the house, according to Connie, was Robert. Garrett just preferred a version of the story where he was the capable one and Robert was the burden. By autumn, Robert and I were eating dinner together most nights. Not because we were pretending the marriage had become normal, because it was easier to tell the truth across a table with someone who actually recognized it. We talked about formation layers and aquifers and boring county meetings and weather reports and things that would have sounded dull to anyone else. But those conversations mattered because they were clean. No manipulation, no debt, no pricing, just two people speaking a language both understood. Winter was when something changed. He made me laugh. A real laugh. Unexpected. One of those laughs that surprises you and leaves behind a strange ache because it reminds you how long you have been living without air. It became harder to remember. I was supposed to think of him as a sentence I was serving. Then February came and my mother called. Her voice had softened again, which only meant she wanted something. She asked how married life was. I asked what she needed. She gave up the performance quickly. The money was almost gone. $500,000 gone in 11 months. I did the math while she talked. House payoff, medical bills, credit lines, hidden spending, a returned truck bought during one of her reckless stretches. Everything evaporating in the same chaos that had consumed every dollar that had ever entered that house. Then she asked for more. She assumed that because I now lived on Holloway land, I had access to Holloway money. She talked as if marrying into the family had made me a bridge back to solvency. She said family helps family. I looked out across the porch at the cold fields and felt something old rise in me. That terrible reflex to become useful before anyone could accuse me of failing. I recognized it the same way an addict recognizes the first pull back toward the thing that will destroy them. This time I did not answer the next call, or the one after that. It was the first real boundary I had ever set with my mother. It felt like sawing through bone. Not long after that, I wandered into Robert's father's old study while looking for a legal pad. The room had an oak desk, a drafting table, rolled maps in tubes along one wall, shelves of textbooks I recognized from graduate school. I asked Robert if his father had been a geologist. He said his father had been self-taught, obsessed, spent 3 decades mapping formations no one else cared about. Garrett called it a waste of time. Robert did not. I unrolled one of the maps on the drafting table and felt my focus sharpen immediately. Hand-drawn cross-sections, careful notation, formation depths. Pencil marks tracing one thin layer again and again across multiple sections. A gray seam. That was what his father called it. I asked what it was. Robert said his father believed something valuable ran beneath the land, something nobody had identified. He had sampled it, documented it, tried to tell the family. Nobody listened. I stared at the repeated pencil line on the map. The part of my mind trained by years of fieldwork did not let me leap to conclusions, but it did wake up. A layer does not get traced that many times by accident. A few weeks later, Robert told me about the accident. We were on the porch. He had the brass compass open in his hand, the needle shaking slightly in the wind. He said the rockfall happened at a site in Wyoming during a consulting job. 2 vertebrae shattered, clean break, emergency surgery, flight to Casper. Garrett arrived the next morning, not to sit with him, to call the insurance company. Everything that followed sounded horrifyingly familiar. Garrett stepped in while Robert was hospitalized. Reworked accounts, centralized authority, filed documents that gave himself signatory control over the trust and the property operations. Told extended family that the injury had affected Robert's cognition. By the time Robert was mobile enough to start pushing back, Garrett had already built a whole structure of control around him and called it protection. Then came the marriage idea. Find Robert a wife. Make the house look stable. Give the whole arrangement a softer face. I listened and realized I had not been brought into this story as a partner or even as a victim in the way I first thought. I had been brought in as cover. 2 families had looked at 2 different vulnerable people and decided both could be used. That night I understood something I had been too numb to name before. Robert and I had not been placed on opposite sides of a transaction. We had both been sold to it. Then came the dinner. Garrett hosted both families in April. My parents drove in from their rented apartment. Garrett's wife Brenda sat almost motionless at one end of the table. 2 cousins checked their phones between bites. Garrett sat at the head like a man presiding over a board meeting disguised as a meal. The conversation started light and false. Then my mother turned it toward the future. She talked about what families can do when they pull together. Garrett picked up the cue without even looking at her. He slid a folder toward Robert and said he had brought the trust documents they had discussed. Robert said they had not discussed them. Garrett said he had mentioned them. Then came the phrase again. Sign where I marked. My mother leaned closer to me and told me family takes care of family. Same tone, same old script, same hunger behind the eyes. I looked from Garrett to Lorraine and realized something almost laughable. They did not even know they were working together. One wanted access. The other wanted control. Same appetite. Different table manners. Robert pushed the documents back and said he would read them first. Garrett stopped moving for a second. A small pause, but it was enough. Because that was the first time I saw urgency flash through him. Real urgency, not irritation, fear. Something was making him rush. The answer arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. The phone rang while Robert was in the shower. A man from a minerals acquisition firm in Denver, asking to speak with the property owner regarding preliminary assessment of subsurface mineral potential on the Holloway parcel. I wrote down his name and number. When I told Robert that night, he went very still. Then he said Garrett had received a similar call weeks earlier. He had overheard part of it on the porch. Garrett had told the caller to wait until paperwork was finalized. Paperwork, the trust consolidation, the rush, the maps, the gray seam. All at once the patterns started to form, not fully. Not enough for proof, but enough to know this was no longer just about family control. Something under that land had turned Garrett from controlling to desperate. We needed Robert's father's files. The next morning I took down a cedar box from the top shelf of the study. Heavy, dusty, latched shut. The room smelled like old paper and dry wood. Robert watched from the doorway. Inside was a small rolled survey map, a leather field notebook, a manila envelope, and a glass jar filled with gray clay. The masking tape label on the jar read section 14 gray seam 42 feet depth. I opened it, rubbed a small amount between my fingers, and my breath caught. If you work with earth long enough, then texture becomes language. Ordinary alluvial clay has one feel, bentonite another, kaolin another. This sample was too light, too smooth, too fine. There was a faint silvery sheen in it I had only ever seen in one category of material mentioned in several recent papers. Lithium-bearing claystone, not proof, but enough to make my hands shake. I opened the manila envelope next. Inside was a more detailed hand-drawn cross-section and a legal document yellow with age. I read it once, then again, then a third time. It was a deed. Not for the surface estate, for the mineral estate, separate conveyance. I turned toward Robert and told him his grandfather had left the mineral rights to him personally, not to the family trust. Not to Garrett, to Robert James Holloway by name. For a second neither of us said anything. The house felt different after that, not changed in any visible way, but charged. Like every board and window and quiet hallway had been waiting for someone to notice what had been sitting there all along. The next morning before dawn, I drove to the survey office and pulled regional stratigraphic files for the Cedar Bluff Quadrangle. Then I cross-referenced the depths in Harold Holloway's notebook with state geological columns and recent federal research. The gray seam was there, not by that name. Nobody had named it. But the position in the sequence and the depth interval matched a claystone horizon that recent studies had flagged as potentially lithium, bearing across parts of the northern plains. Reported concentrations in analogous formations ranged from 700 to over 1,200 parts per million. The threshold for commercial viability was 500. I sat at my desk with cold coffee and a 27-year-old field notebook and felt the numbers lining up. Not a fantasy, not a desperate guess. A formation, persistent, mappable. Possibly worth more than every crop that land had ever grown. When I got home, Robert was on the porch with the brass compass beside him. I set the gray clay jar on the table and told him I needed to send it to a lab. He looked at the jar for a long time before he said the word lithium. I nodded. He closed his eyes, not from surprise. From grief, because his father had known, and died before anyone believed him. That night I packed the sample carefully and mailed it to Dr. Grace Hollies at the university lab in Lincoln. A colleague I trusted, someone who would run the assays properly and keep quiet until the data spoke for itself. Then the waiting began. Those 3 weeks felt longer than the marriage had. Because once you suspect the truth, you start seeing all the ways people move around it. Garrett came by more often, brought revised trust documents, brought his attorney Harlan Briggs to explain asset consolidation in a tone so condescending it made my teeth hurt. Robert asked one question: did the documents include mineral rights? Harlan hesitated. Garrett answered too fast. That told me enough. Friday, Garrett came alone, angrier, closer, louder. He talked about all he had done for the family. How he had kept things together after their father died, after Robert's accident. Then he said it again. Robert does not get a vote. That is how it has always been. I watched Robert carefully. Something changed in his face then. Quiet, invisible to anyone not looking, but I saw it. A decision. Garrett scheduled a family meeting for the following Saturday, a signing ceremony. Make it official. Put it behind us. He left believing the pressure would work. He had no idea what was already moving toward him. Around that same time, I ran into Daniel at a hardware store in Grand Island. He was in the fastener aisle holding a box of screws like he had forgotten why he came. For a second it felt like a piece of my old life had been dropped into the wrong room. He asked how I was. I said I was okay. Then he asked if I was happy. That question stayed suspended between us longer than any other sentence either of us said. A year earlier I would have lied. I would have given him something neat and polite. Something designed to keep other people comfortable. Instead, I told him I was becoming something and I was not sure what yet, but it belonged to me. He nodded. Then he told me he had kept the ring for 2 months before donating it to a women's shelter. He said someone should get something good out of it. I almost cried, not because I wanted him back. Because I finally understood what I had lost when I let my family decide my worth. Daniel had loved me without trying to own me. That felt almost unreal now. When I drove away that day, the windows were down and the air was warm. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like a person being pulled backward. I felt like someone still moving forward. Then Robert and I went to the county recorder's office. Pauline had been filing land records since the 1980s and looked like she trusted paper more than people. She pulled the plat, the homestead patent, 3 later conveyances. Then finally the separate instrument recorded in 1989. There it was, clear as daylight. Harold Holloway Sr. had conveyed the mineral estate of Section 14 directly to his grandson Robert James Holloway, not to the trust, not jointly, not conditionally, personally, split estate. Surface in the trust, minerals in Robert's name, always. Robert stared at the certified copy like it might disappear if he blinked. It did not. On the drive home, neither of us said much. There are moments when language becomes too small for what is happening. That was one of them. Everything Garrett had built depended on the assumption that Robert did not know what he owned. Now he did. Garrett came to the house 3 times that week, Monday with revised papers, Wednesday with Harlan again, Friday with raw temper. Each time Robert stayed calm. Each time Garrett got a little less polished, a little less certain. By Friday he was not performing competence anymore. He was trying to force compliance. Saturday was coming. Then Tuesday morning, the call came from Grace Hollies. She told me to sit down before she gave me the number. 940 parts per million lithium. I gripped the counter so hard my fingers hurt. She said it was not a trace reading. It was commercial-grade claystone. She said if the formation was persistent across even part of the parcel, then serious mineral developers would be interested immediately. She said she would send the certified report by Friday. When I hung up, I went straight to the study. Robert was at the drafting table with his father's notebook open. I told him the number. For a second, he just sat there. Then he said his father knew. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no triumph, Just that one sentence carrying all the sorrow in it. His father had known the land held value, had mapped it, sampled it, saved the evidence. And the people around him had treated it like obsession, because it was easier than admitting he was right. That evening, I sat on the porch and finally saw the whole shape of it. A disabled geologist pushed aside by his own brother. A grandfather who quietly protected the mineral estate by deeding it to the grandson directly. A father who found the seam and documented it, but never lived to see it proven. A brother who seized the trust after the accident and tried to absorb every asset he could control. A mother who sold her daughter into the arrangement because she thought stability had a price tag. And me. A geologist from a wrecked family who had spent her life learning how to read the things other people ignored. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. They had bought me to make Robert easier to manage. Instead, they had brought the one person into that house who could understand exactly what his father left behind. That night, Robert and I sat at the kitchen table until 2 a.m. deciding what to do. We could have staged a dramatic ambush. Walked into the family meeting and dropped the papers on the table just to watch everyone scramble. For a few minutes I wanted that, wanted them to feel sudden panic. Wanted my mother to understand what it meant to be helpless while someone else decided your future. Robert shook his head. That is what Garrett would do. He was right, so we made a different plan. No lies, no manipulation, no tricks, just facts placed in the correct order. First, we retained an independent property attorney in Grand Island, not Harlan, someone with no loyalty to Garrett. Second, we filed a notice of mineral claim with the county recorder, so it would become public record. Third, we had the attorney prepare a formal letter confirming Robert's sole ownership of the mineral estate under the recorded deed, and notifying any interested parties that the minerals were not part of the family trust. Fourth, we kept our mouths shut until the room was full. My mother called Thursday night. Somehow she had heard rumors that a mining company was sniffing around land near Cedar Bluff. Her voice turned warm the second she thought money might be involved. She said if the land was worth something, then she and my father had a right to know because they had made this happen. That was the moment I said the sentence I should have said years earlier. You sold me into this family. Silence. Then the usual phrases, everything we sacrificed. How could you cut your own mother out? Family, obligation, debt. In the background I heard my father say leave her alone. My mother snapped at him and he went quiet again. For 32 years my father had responded to conflict the same way, by disappearing inside it. I used to feel rage when he did that. That night I felt something colder than rage. Finality. My mother told me they would be at the meeting on Saturday because Garrett had invited them. Of course he had. 2 families, 2 hungers, 1 room. Friday evening the certified assay report arrived. I printed 2 copies in the study, 1 for the table, 1 for the folder. The attorney's letter had already gone out by certified mail. The mineral claim had been filed, public record, irrevocable. I laid everything on the kitchen table. The certified deed copy, the assay report, the attorney's letter, the filed claim, and beside them the jar of gray clay, 4 documents and 1 object. That was all, no opinions, no revenge speeches, just truth. Robert picked up the deed and traced the old type with 1 finger. He said his grandfather must have known exactly who Garrett would become. Even then he looked at me and said he would say no. Not quietly inside himself the way he had done for 4 years, out loud. Saturday came bright and hard. Garrett had arranged the living room like a boardroom, chairs in a semicircle. Harlan Briggs at a side table with trust documents and 3 pens, Brenda in the corner, 2 cousins along the wall. My parents sitting close together though not touching, my mother alert and eager, my father looking like he would rather vanish through the floorboards. Robert and I entered last. I pushed his chair into the room and positioned him at the open end of the semicircle facing Garrett. The leather folder rested on my lap. Garrett smiled that polished smile and told everyone this would not take long. He walked over with the documents. Yellow tabs marking every signature line. a pen placed on top. He said they had discussed this and that the trust consolidation would formalize what everyone had agreed on: unified management, surface rights, subsurface rights, clean and simple. Then he set the papers on Robert's armrest. The room went still. My mother leaned forward to watch the pen. Harlan opened his own copy. Garrett folded his hands and waited for the signature like a man waiting for gravity to do what gravity always does. Robert picked up the pen. I heard someone exhale. He turned the pen once in his hand, then he set it back down. No, one word. Garrett blinked like he had misheard. Robert said it again. No, I will not be signing this. Garrett told Harlan to explain it better. Robert said no explanation was needed. Then he looked right at his brother and said the words that split the room open. You said I do not get a vote. He said Garrett had said it at the kitchen table, in front of the attorney, in front of me, every time Robert tried to take part in a decision about his own property. Then Robert put both hands on the arms of his chair and said I vote no. That was when I opened the folder. The sound of paper in a silent room can be louder than yelling. I placed the first document on the table between us. Certified deed, recorded in 1989. Mineral estate of Section 14 conveyed separately and directly to Robert James Holloway in fee simple. Garrett looked down, then up, then back down again. I placed the second document beside it. Certified lab assay, gray seam sample from 42 feet, lithium concentration 940 parts per million, then the third. Letter from independent counsel confirming sole ownership of the mineral estate, then the fourth, publicly filed mineral claim recorded the day before, then the jar of gray clay. No one spoke. Not immediately. Some moments arrived too fast for denial. Garrett stared at the documents like staring harder might rearrange them. Harlan took the deed first, read enough to know. Then took the letter, then the assay. His face changed before he said a word. My mother stood up so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. She looked at the papers, and then at me with that strange expression greedy people get when they realize the door they thought was locked was never theirs to open. She started saying family again. Said we could work together, said after everything they had done. I did not raise my voice. I told her she had said I was always going to pay them back. Then I told her I just had, with the truth. She looked like I had struck her. Across the room, Garrett finally found his voice. He said the deed was old. He said there was no way it still mattered. He said his father would never have let this happen. I corrected him. It was his grandfather who signed it, and recorded deeds do not expire. Harlan closed his briefcase. That sound told Garrett more than any sentence could have. Still, he turned to the attorney like a drowning man reaching for the nearest thing. Harlan said he could not advise contesting a recorded conveyance with clear chain of title. Garrett slammed his palm onto the table so hard the gray clay jar jumped. Then he started pacing. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, talking louder as if volume could create ownership. He had carried the family, he had paid the taxes, he had held everything together. None of it changed the paper on the table. My mother tried a different tactic. Tears. She crossed the room and sat close enough for me to smell the same perfume she had worn my whole childhood. Sweet and false. She told me to think about what we could all do as a family. That was when I finally said what I had known for a long time. We were never a family. We were a balance sheet. My father spoke then, first time all day. He said he should have stopped this years ago. Everyone looked at him. He kept staring at his hands. There it was, not redemption. Not apology big enough to matter. Just a ruined man finally saying the sentence too late. I told him yes, he should have. Robert gathered the documents, put them back in the leather folder. Tightened the lid on the gray clay jar, set the folder on his lap. Then he said they were done. Garrett stepped forward and said they could not just leave. There was still more to discuss. Robert said there was nothing left to discuss. The minerals were his. The claim was filed. He had counsel. If Garrett wanted to talk, he could talk to the attorney. Then I moved behind Robert's chair and put my hands on the handles. My mother told me not to walk out on her. I stopped at the doorway and looked back, pressed blouse, painted nails. Eyes that had appraised me my entire life. I told her I was not walking out on her. I was walking away from the price tag she put on me before I was old enough to know what it meant. Then I pushed Robert out of that room, across the plywood ramp, down the gravel driveway. Behind us someone was yelling, probably Garrett, maybe my mother too. The words blurred into the wind. On the porch, Robert reached back and touched my hand and said, "Nobody asks anymore. We answer for ourselves now." That sentence hit harder than the victory, because it was not about the minerals. Not really. It was about personhood, the right to answer for yourself after too many years of being spoken for. What happened after that was less dramatic and more permanent, which is usually how real justice works. Garrett hired a new attorney who reviewed the title chain and charged him thousands of dollars to confirm exactly what the first attorney had already told him. The deed was valid. The split estate was real. The minerals were Robert's. The trust kept the surface estate. The mineral rights stayed with him. Robert and I interviewed multiple development firms before choosing one with a strong environmental monitoring plan and water protection requirements written into the agreement. We moved slowly. Carefully, the opposite of how the people around us had always moved. The first distribution changed practical things first. Debts cleared, accessibility upgrades, legal fees. Then we created a foundation, supporting disabled adults trying to regain financial autonomy in rural counties, where being isolated can make exploitation look like care. We helped fund home health aides because people like Connie hold whole lives together, and almost no one pays them like it matters. As for my parents, I returned the remaining portion of the original $500,000 through a clean wire transfer with one line in the memo. Final payment. No further obligations. I did not send a letter. I did not call. I did not explain. A boundary does not need a speech. I told them I would take one call a month if they wanted contact. I would not take guilt. I would not take emergencies manufactured out of bad decisions. I would not be the family rescue plan anymore. Garrett lost standing the way people usually do, not all at once, by inches. Cousins stopped answering. Neighbors started asking questions. People who had accepted his version of Robert for years slowly realized how much of that version depended on Robert staying quiet. He was not quiet anymore. Robert and I never had a second wedding. No do-over ceremony, no vow renewal, no attempt to repaint the first day into something pretty. We did not need it. What formed between us was never dramatic in the movie sense. No thunderstorm confession, no grand declaration in a doorway. It was slower than that, steadier. Built from meals and legal files and silences that no longer felt threatening. Built from someone finally believing him. Built from him trusting me with the truth his father had left in a cedar box. He made me laugh. I made him visible. He gave me patience. I gave him proof. That was love, even if it arrived wearing work clothes instead of music. On our second anniversary, he handed me the brass compass. I told him to keep it. He said it had always been meant for the person who finished the work. I held it in my palm and felt the warmth of the metal. 2 years earlier, I had stood at the end of a driveway and married a stranger because my mother told me it was time to pay her back. Now I stood on a porch beside the man they had tried to erase, while holding the instrument his family had carried across generations to find true north. Sometimes that is what healing is. Not a miracle, not a speech, just finally standing in a life no one else gets to price. I still think about my father sometimes, not in a forgiving way, in a clear way. Silence does damage too. Maybe that is the part of the story that hurts the most. My mother tried to sell me and my father, let the room stay quiet enough for the sale to happen. Some betrayals are loud. Some just fail to interrupt. And I think about Daniel too, about the life that broke apart because I did not know yet how to choose myself. That loss never became romantic in my memory. It became instructional. Love is not enough if you still believe your worth can be invoiced by the people who raised you. The hardest truth was never that my parents put a price on me. It was that some part of me believed I should pay it, That is the part I had to bury. Not my family, not the past, that belief. The belief that being useful is the same thing as being loved. The belief that sacrifice will finally buy peace from people who profit from your pain. The belief that if you hand over enough of yourself, they will someday stop asking. They do not stop asking. You stop answering. That was the real ending of this story, not the deed, not the minerals, not the money. The ending was the moment I understood I was never a debt to be settled. Robert was never a burden to be managed, and truth does not need to shout when everyone in the room has been living off a lie. If this story stayed with you, then do not leave quietly. Like the video. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments the exact moment you knew the room was about to turn against them. And if you have ever been treated like a solution instead of a person, then put this in the comments. I am not for sale, because nobody gets to set your price. And the people who try almost never know what you are actually worth.